Hi everybody, in this video we're going to create a really cool animation that involves taking some letters in a word, changing the color on them periodically, but that color change is going to be entirely random, and of course it's also going to be animated. So what we'll be creating will be something that looks like what you see on screen right now. We have the words hello world, and you can see that each letter happens to have a different color that it cycles through as it seems to go from one state to another. So we're going to look at first some slides that set us up at a high level on how to think about this problem, and then we'll go into more detail in terms of how do we go from what we have as a high level goal into actual HTML and CSS. No JavaScript here. Actually, I'm kidding. There's a lot of JavaScript involved. You're going to see in a few moments that's going to bring this example to life. So let's go ahead and get started. So in terms of at a high level, what I'm going to talk about is this. It takes a lot of techniques that you might have heard about in terms of how to create animations, how to do state changes in animations, and combines them all into one effect. So I wouldn't say it's an advanced effect, but it's definitely the most basic one either in terms of skills needed, but we'll walk through all this together. But the thing to keep in mind is that the most surface level observation I'll make is that there's a color change. We change from one color to another. Let's say I have the letter A, starts out at orange, it then changes into blue. And that is our transition, that is our animation, that is the thing we're animating from one state to another. And now if we have multiple changes, it looks kind of like this. We start with an orange A, it becomes blue colored, then it becomes pink, then it becomes green. It's a sequence of color changes. So our animation doesn't just run once, doesn't just do one particular state change from one state to another. It is a sequence of state changes that we're animating. Now, if we look at this, the trick in always creating these kind of animations is to find out what the looping pattern is. What is that one nugget that we can identify as a repeatable item that we can then abstract away the details on and then apply over and over and over again to create our animation. So if we had to look at it from that lens, one looping pattern would be the first transition from one color A to color B. And we're using that as an example of what we might want to call this. Not want to specify orange or blue, but just generic color A, color B, we go from one state to another. So this would be the one looping pattern. The second one would be the ending of the first pattern is the beginning of the other. You can see there's a cycle that is really being created here. And similarly, you can see that the next pattern is the ending of the second pattern is the beginning of a third pattern. And this keeps going on and on. And so using the color A and color B approach, let's say that we abstract away some more of the details. Color A is what we start with. Color B is where we want to go to, and the job of our JavaScript and HTML and CSS and the rendering engine is to create a transition between the values stored by color A and color B. And so for the first looping pattern, it would be color A to color B. Second one, exact same case, where color A is now what was color B before, and so on. And if we had to stagger what the sequence of color changes would look like, here's what you'd see. You'd see that we start off with color A, color B, and then once that animation ends and the next one's about to begin, we swap the order of what becomes color A and color B to where now color A is the beginning of our second animation sequence, goes all the way to color B, and when the third animation happens, that becomes the starting point, so color B becomes color A, and so on. And the reason why I'm calling this out, it might seem a little awkward for me to talk about this, it's because this goes a little bit on how we implement the animation itself. The swapping of the final value to be the first value is one of the key pieces that makes this example work the way it does. And so instead of talking more about it, let's go ahead and dive right in and start looking at both how to translate these lines into code, but also how some of that code can also help solve some of the other problems we'll be running into. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up VS Code. And the thing I want to highlight here is I have a very simple application, nothing fancy going on here. It's a starting page, empty HTML file, and maybe this one goes a little too large here, and I'm going to blame a sticky mouse there. And while I'm really doing is, as I'm making edits here, I'm going to be seeing the update showing up on the right-hand side. So it's a very simple live preview. And right now, our page isn't doing anything. If I just type in, for example, random letter color changer, and save, you can now see the title of our page has been appropriately updated, which is a good spot to be in, which means that the mapping between what I'm seeing in my code editor and what I see on the page is all set. And so the first thing I'm going to start with is just the actual word that I want to animate. So H1, hello world, and exclamation mark, enter. And so right now you can see hello world displays on screen. Good starting point. we're already on fire here. And so the next thing I want to do is, let's go ahead and start styling it just to look a little bit like the letter that we ultimately want it to look like. And so I'm going to go to Style, add some style rules. First, let's do some basic centering of it. Body, display grid, place content, center, and height. You typically want to put 100 VH units, but because I'm doing an animation and you can see my thumbnail at the bottom right corner, I'm just going to keep it as 50 VH instead. And so with that going on, let's see. I'm going to make it so that the colors are now the next things that we are able to set. And so for that, I want to set H1 font family equals sans serif font color equals #333. So we just have a dark gray color, we have sans serif font, and it's time to make some more changes from there. Now the thing that keep in mind is that what we're doing is animating each letter individually. And today there really isn't an easy way in CSS to do that without having to either do a lot of descendant or child or nth of child kind of selectors, but we need a special selector that actually not just animate all of H1, but each character in H1, each text element gets its own special treatment. There are some proposals, but nothing tangible there yet. And so what it means is that we need to treat each letter as its own element that we can individually target. And what this means is that we need to use a span and wrap each letter inside a span element. And so this is not quite as painful as it sounds, but it is a little bit of busy work. So span, hello world, I'm just going to make this H. And the easiest way I'm going to do this is I'm going to copy the span and paste it a bunch of times. All right, and now replace it with HE. Then it's going to be L, another L, HO, hello, and we need to put a space here. Now you might think that just adding a space character here will help us get what we need, but no, you must use the actual ampersand NBSP colon characters instead to truly make it a space. Hello, and then WO R L. These are one of those few times where I wish the autocomplete did not kick in with every single character, so a little bit of manual work on my end there. Alright, so I create a span for every element, and once I've done that, you can now see hello world appearing. Now there's another thing to keep in mind here. The moment I did that, notice spacing between hello and world. And the reason is that when we have our spans on each different line, in many ways HTML thinks of that line break between them as a space character. There are many ways of solving it, but the easiest way, and it looks like a hack, but it is the web. And so what is a hack today is accepted practice tomorrow, is to set font size on the H1 to 0, and then have H1 span be the styles I specify here, where I set font size equals 96 pixels. And so once I've done that, well, nice, going to be a little bit on the large side, but it's okay. Let me just reduce size back to 100%. You can now see everything is properly styled, properly spaced as characters go, and we can also see that our span is, each letter is represented by a span element. Okay, so we're in a good spot here. We now have each of the letters arranged in their own DOM element, and we need to think about how we're going to do the next step here, which is start to animate them. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to start defining the two variables that we saw in the slides, color A and color B. So I'm going to do color A. I'm just going to hard code it to value of blue, and then color B is a value of red. Okay, and right now nothing is actually happening because there's nothing for us to really do here because we just specified these two colors. And so what I want to do is create an animation where we go from one value to another that then ultimately kicks in and gives the colors that we want. And so for that, I'm going to do an animation name equals change color. And I'm not using the animation shorthand property. I'm actually going to define each property by hand because I tend to like it. I think it's more readable. Animation duration. And for this one, as I said, to let's just say 0.2 seconds. And let's set animation iteration count to infinite. And let's go ahead and set the animation timing function, we'll just keep it as ease in for now. There's other cooler values we can provide. Now, just doing this doesn't really do much. Now we need to actually specify the animation itself. So I'm going to go ahead and specify add keyframes, change color. The from is going to be color, is var -- color A, and then it's going to color var -- color B. All right. So once I've done this, notice what you see on the screen here. You see hello world, and you see each letter now animating from red to blue. This is not the greatest effect that we've ever created, but it's also not the worst one either, because at least now we can see that each of our letters is being animated, and the variables for color A and color blue are being used properly by keyframes to do what they're doing. Now, in order to be able to go from this to having each color be unique, we need to get into JavaScript territory. And so we're going to do that next. And so to do some of this work, I will be setting a random color. And in a previous video, I walked through the 20 lines of code we need to write to get a random color script to actually appear using the HSLA values. And so I'm not going to repeat that in material, nor am I going to have that code repeated here again. Instead, I'm going to ask you to add the script that gives you the random color. And the link below goes into more detail on this. So script source equals, in this case, https www.drupal.com/js/randomcolors.js, and that is essentially it. Let me make sure it actually does display something properly. Nope, I misspelled something there. What did I misspell? Oh, it's randomcolor.js, not randomcolors.js. Let's double check that. Yep, I'm in the right spot here. All right, cool. See, aren't you glad we test these things? At least I know that I'm capable of making many typos and many mistakes when I'm writing my code, and so I do this all the time. Hopefully you do not have the same problem that I do. All right, so our script has been specified here. It's going to get loaded when the page loads, and now it's at a script element where we can actively start doing the work to actually start animating our elements. Now the first thing I'm going to do is, I notice that my heading doesn't have an ID element, ID value. So I'm going to set heading ID value equals message, because I want to reference it in JavaScript so I can have each letter be given its own animation. So let message equals document.querySelector. It's going to be hashtag message. All right, and so message is now set. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function called Animate Characters. Function Animate Characters, and it's going to take an element as its argument. And let me go ahead and just call Animate Characters as well. Animate Characters message. And so right now, of course, this code doesn't do anything. You know, it gets a reference to a DOM element, and we call it Animate Characters, and the message argument is being passed in, but nothing's really happening. And so the first thing I want to do is create our variable called span elements. It's going to be message, element dot document dot element dot query selector all, and it's going to be span. So what I'm basically specifying is that on the element, in this case message, that we get, find all the span elements and store them in the span elements array. And the next thing is to, for each of these elements, is to do several things. The first thing I want to do is give each one a random duration value, set some default properties so that they're all animating with the same exact blue to red. And what was the duration specified? 0.2 seconds, so that each one has a unique duration value. So let's start with that one. For let I equals 0, I equals some span elements dot length, and I plus plus. And let span element equals span elements bracket I, just so that we have a reference to an individual element here. And then let random duration equals 0.2 plus math.random times 1. So we'll go from a value of either 0.2 to 1.2 as our duration for each of our animation. And then last thing is going to be span element dot style dot set property. And I'm going to set the value property called duration and have its value be set to random duration plus seconds. It needs to be in a second value. If it's a number, it doesn't really do anything. So if I refresh the page, it's automatically being refreshed. You're not going to see anything happening. And the reason is that the duration property isn't being recognized by our animation, and that requires us to go up here and change the value from 0.2 seconds to being a value of var / duration. And once I've done that, notice what you're seeing here now. You're seeing each of our letters is now animating from blue to red with its own different color scheme. And because the blue to red change is sudden, it's at a transition where it goes from blue to red back to blue, it restarts over and over. So you can see that more clearly now, where it looks like a sudden, it's a smooth animation from blue to red, but once it hits that end, it just suddenly and jarringly gets back to the very beginning. That goes back to what we saw in the slides earlier of being able to have the ending point of our transition, or animation in this case, be the starting point of the next looping sequence. And so that's something we're going to be tackling in our JavaScript very shortly, as in a few moments. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I want to set an initial random color on all of our elements. And the way I'm going to do that is after our loop, our loop is in a good spot here, there's nothing really for us to do, is call set initial random color, and span elements is the argument for this one. And the other one is I want to start setting the color and make these changes each time the animation runs to completion on each letter. I want to start running some code as well. And that means I want to listen to the animation iteration event that's going to be called each time the animation ends, and then it loops. And so for that, I'm going to do message.add event listener, and it's going to be animation iteration, calling change color, and it's going to be true. I'm okay with the bubbling being captured here. So we did two things here. We're going to call a function called set initial random color, and then we listen to the event or the animation ending, and then do some JavaScript later. So the first thing I'm going to do is do the first set initial random color. Function set initial random color, and elements is the argument. And so what I'm going to put here is for let I equals 0, I equals less than elements dot length, I plus plus, specify let span element equal elements bracket I, and span element dot style dot set property is going to be dash dash color A, and then get random color function without value. This get random color function is specified in the JavaScript just added right there, so just keep that in mind. And then lastly, span element dot style dot set property dash dash color B is going to be just as above, get random color dot value. So let me go ahead and paste that in here, and let's see if that does the right thing. Let me hit save, and when we do that, notice what we see here now. Notice that the starting and ending color A and color B on each element is now being repeated, but it's the behavior is the same. The ending of the animation is jarring and it starts back to the first color, which is color A, but at least the transition from color A to color B, that is nicely animated, and we're starting to see that our example is starting to look a little bit more like what we want to do. Now the next step is we know we have this event listener now, where when each time and let's say this is like H, for example, each time H goes from this beige color to a green color and loops again, the animation iteration event will be fired, and change color will be called on this particular animation that is affecting the letter H. And so what we want to do here is when that is called, we want to set the value of color A, the starting point of our animation, the color to be the ending point, which is color B. This is where the swap comes in to make the transition feel like it is completely natural and smooth. And so I'm going to do function change color. I'm going to use E as the argument for this. I'm going to span element equals E. Actually, I want to make this event. I've gotten a lot of feedback that E is no longer relevant. I mean, it's not helpful. Event is more clear on what's the argument there, so I'm going to call it event and then have event target. So the first thing is let's span style equals get computed style span element. The reason I'm doing this is that in order to read the custom property, I need to be able to see what's being done, and the best way to do that is by using get computed style, and let final color equals span style dot get property value of dash dash color B. So now final color is now storing the value that the span element has already set from color B. So what set initial random colors had already specified. And so now all it remains is to make sure we swap where the starting point of our animation is now going to have color A's value set to color B, and then color B will be a new color. You know, it might be hard to explain verbally, but when you see the code, you'll see what I mean. Span element dot style dot set property dash dash color A, and then final color. So I'm specifying that the beginning of our animation, color A, is going to be what was specified as color B as the animation had just ended. And then span element dot style dot set property, and this is color B. And if you can guess what it's going to be, it's going to be a new color, and that means it's going to be get random color dot value. Okay, so I'm going to hit save here, and if everything worked out correctly, we'll see hello world animating properly from one color to another, and then making that whole transition smooth, where the ending of one transition or one animation will cause a new color to be generated. All right, let's see this happening. And notice when I've done that, you can see that now H goes from, let's say, green to a darker green to yellow to purple and so on, and each letter in sequence is appropriately being animated as well. Now, this is where we're pretty much done with the big part of the coding, but I do want to take a step back and kind of walk through some optimizations we can make. Now, I know one favor we're going to be getting almost immediately is this, is why did I create set initial random color span elements when what I'm doing here in the loop is almost identical to what's being done here? In fact, why can't I just copy all of this code that is currently here, paste it in this location, and then just be completely better off? Like, this whole function doesn't need to exist at all. Like, why do I do this? And the reason why I'm doing this is there's going to come a point where I may want to call the color of a letter independent of when I'm actually setting up the entire animation itself. And so I want to make this as reusable as possible, and that's why I kind of broke it off. And these are some of the things that you can choose to do or you can choose not to do. You have a lot of freedom with code in going the path that you think is appropriate, but I like to keep my code as modular as I can where appropriate, just so that when I can anticipate this will be something I'll be calling regularly, I'll keep that as a separate function altogether and not have to worry about calling animate characters every time where I'm reinitializing everything from the very, very beginning, which is often unnecessary work. And the last part is this. Notice that, I wanted to make hello world be its own thing, and so therefore to animate it, I manually converted each letter into a span. There's actually a way you can do that in JavaScript much easily as well. So if you know you're going to be animating a bunch of letters, let's say a large paragraph, especially the contents of that paragraph will be changing dynamically based on some input or something from the server, you can't really be expected to go in and do this whole span manual magic every single time, because A is going to be dreadfully boring, and B, you just can't do it in cases where you don't even know what the value is going to be. So for a few small amounts of text for this article, like where it says hello world, for this video, it made sense. Great, go for it. But for longer pieces of text, you want to do it in JavaScript. And if you look at the comments, I'm going to have a link to a forum post where I walk through how to make all of this work. And so with that, we have gotten to the end of this particular animation, and I hope you really found it enjoyable in terms of taking advantage of a lot of techniques that are often theoretical or often things you might be thinking about, but actually applying them to our animation as well. Because at the end of the day, if you take a lot of steps back, an animation is nothing more than a state change from one state to another. And by just taking advantage of that very simple concept of state goes from one to state A starting point to an ending point, and swapping the ending to a new starting point, we can create a sequence, a chained animation that to an end user looks very seamless, looks very nice, but in reality gives a lot of power in being able to do a whole lot more. If you have any questions, please post the forums at formatgroup.com, where I and others would be happy to help you out with your animation question or any kind of a front-end topic that you might be running into. If you found this video helpful or not helpful, still tell your friends and enemies all about it. Hit subscribe to be notified of new videos that I'll be recording. Follow me at Krupa on Twitter, on Facebook, and other places to get bite-sized updates on web development topics that I might be writing about. And speaking of writing, I also tend to put a lot of the content in book form within Kindle and paperback editions, a bunch of books that might be just up your alley. For example, Creating Web Animations by O'Reilly is a book that goes into much more detail on how to create animations for the web, and I think you'll find it really good, but other books are really good as well, and they also make great gifts, so keep that in mind. And with that, I will see you all next time.